Welcome to a deep dive, one that just might turn your world upside down today.
Oh, sounds intriguing.
We're going to be cracking open Richard Dawkins's controversial book, The Selfish Gene.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of this one.
Get ready to explore a whole new way of thinking about evolution.
Okay.
One where the stars of the show aren't the animals or plants we see, but the tiny genes working behind the scenes.
That's a good way to put it. It's a real perspective shift.
Yeah.
Dawkins argues that we're all, in a sense, survival machines built by our genes.
Okay.
He flips the script on the idea that evolution is all about individual or species survival.
Right.
Instead, he puts those genes front and center.
So you're saying that everything we do, all our struggles and triumphs, are really just our genes pulling the strings to ensure their own survival?
Well, it's not about conscious puppet mastering, but more like a set of instructions guiding our actions.
Okay.
Think of it this way. Imagine you're looking at a Necker cube.
Oh, yeah.
One of those optical illusions where you can see the cube from different angles.
Right.
Dawkins doesn't necessarily throw out everything we know about evolution,
Right.
but he gives us this new way of seeing it with the gene as the central player.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Yeah, that's helpful. So how does this selfish gene idea actually play out in the real world?
Well, Dawkins argues that a gene's selfishness isn't about feelings.
Yeah.
It's about behavior.
Right.
A selfish gene is simply one that's really good at replicating itself
Okay.
and getting passed on to future generations.
Right.
And sometimes that means promoting behaviors that seem counterintuitive, like, say, a mother bird risking her life to protect her chicks.
That doesn't sound very selfish on the mother's part, though.
Right, and that's where it gets interesting.
Yeah.
Her sacrifice might seem selfless, but from the gene's perspective,
It's a brilliant
strategy.
Right.
The mother shares many genes with her chicks.
Okay.
So by ensuring their survival, those genes, including the ones that predisposed her to protect them, get passed on.
So the genes are playing a long game, thinking beyond the individual's lifespan.
Exactly. And that's why Dawkins says the gene is the real star of the evolutionary show.
Okay.
Individuals live and die, but genes can potentially exist for millions of years,
Wow.
hopping from one generation to the next.
Right.
They're in constant competition with their alleles,
Okay.
alternative versions of themselves for a spot on the chromosome. It's a battle of the fittest genes.
So how does a gene win this competition? What makes one version better than another?
Think of it like a race where the prize is getting passed on to the next generation.
Okay.
Genes that give their carriers a survival edge have a better chance of winning.
Okay.
For instance, a gene that makes a gazelle slightly faster
Okay.
might mean the difference between escaping a lion and becoming lunch.
Wow.
That speedy gazelle lives to reproduce, passing on the fast gene, and those genes become more common over time.
So it all comes back to survival. But what about things like aging and death? It seems like those would be pretty bad for a gene's chance of survival.
This is where things get a bit bleak, but fascinating nonetheless.
Okay.
Dawkins points to Peter Medawar's theory of aging,
Okay.
which might seem counterintuitive at first.
Okay.
Medawar proposed that aging is basically an accumulation of harmful genes
Okay.
that only kick in later in life.
Oh.
Since these genes don't affect an organism's ability to reproduce, natural selection doesn't weed them out.
Wait, so you're saying our genes are programmed to self-destruct after we've had kids?
It's not quite intentional self-destruction,
Huh?
but more like a ticking time bomb.
Right.
Genes that cause problems early in life,
Okay.
preventing reproduction, are quickly eliminated.
Okay.
But those sneaky late-acting genes, they slip through the net, accumulating in the gene pool and eventually leading to the deterioration we know as aging.
Oh, wow. Talk about a delayed reaction. So if we zoom out from the individual, where do all these genes hang out, so to speak?
Dawkins calls it the gene pool,
Goat.
this vast reservoir of genetic information
Right.
constantly being mixed and remixed with each generation.
Okay.
You can think of it as the modern-day version
Yeah.
of that primordial soup where life first arose.
Okay.
While individuals are temporary players, the gene pool is the stage where the real drama of evolution unfolds.
Wow. Okay, so we're all just temporary vessels carrying these ancient genes. That's a bit humbling.
It is. But what's truly remarkable is how those genes, over millions of years, have built these incredible survival machines. Us.
Yeah.
Think about our brains.
Uh-huh.
These incredibly complex organs are essentially powerful computers built by genes,
Right.
designed to help us navigate the world
Okay.
and make decisions that, you guessed it, increase the chances of our genes surviving.
So my brain is like a personal strategist for my genes.
You could say that.
Yeah.
And like a good strategist,
Yeah.
our brains have evolved to be incredibly adaptable,
Right.
allowing us to respond to challenges and opportunities in ways that benefit our genes. Sometimes that adaptability leads to behaviors that might seem surprising or even downright devious. For instance, think about deception.
Deception? You mean like animals tricking each other? Can genes really promote lying?
Dawkins argues that lying, in an evolutionary sense, doesn't necessarily involve conscious intent.
Right.
It's more about any action that effectively deceives another organism, regardless of whether it's intentional.
Okay. I'm starting to see where this is going.
Think about birds that give false alarm calls to scare other birds away from food.
Right.
It's a manipulative tactic, but one that can directly benefit the liar's genes by securing more resources.
Oh, so it's a genetic con game. But wouldn't a world full of deceivers eventually collapse? How can lying be a stable strategy in the long run?
That's a great question, and it brings us to a fascinating concept. The evolutionarily stable strategy, or ESS.
Okay.
Dawkins uses the analogy of hawks and doves. Not the birds themselves, but different strategies for dealing with conflict.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What are these hawk and dove strategies?
Imagine a population of animals competing for resources.
Okay.
Hawks are always aggressive, ready to fight for what they want.
Got it.
Doves, on the other hand, are pacifists preferring to avoid conflict.
Right.
Now, you might think a world full of hawks would be the most successful, right?
It does seem like being aggressive would give you an edge.
But here's the twist. Constant fighting is costly. You risk injury or even death.
Okay.
Dawkins points out that neither a pure hawk strategy nor a pure dove strategy is truly stable in the long run.
So what's the winning formula?
It turns out a stable population likely includes a mix of hawks and doves with the exact proportions depending on the costs and benefits of each strategy in a given environment. It's all about finding a balance.
A delicate dance of aggression and cooperation, all orchestrated by those genes. This is getting me thinking about other power dynamics in nature, like the differences between males and females.
That's an excellent point and a perfect segue to our next topic,
Yeah.
the battle of the sexes.
Ooh, this deep dive just keeps getting more intriguing. I can't wait to hear what you have to say about that.
We'll explore those fascinating dynamics in our next installment. Until then, ponder this. If genes are constantly competing for survival, how does cooperation, especially between different species, ever arise? It's a puzzle worth unraveling.
I'll definitely be thinking about that.
Mm-hmm.
Looking forward to part 2 of our deep dive into the selfish gene. Welcome back to our deep dive into the selfish gene. Last time I left off with a cliffhanger.
Cliffhanger.
Yeah. How can cooperation evolve in a world seemingly ruled by selfish genes?
Right. It's one of those evolutionary puzzles
Yeah.
that Dawkins tackles head on. Remember, selfish doesn't mean a gene is consciously plotting or scheming.
Right.
It's all about which genes are most effective at getting themselves replicated and passed on.
Okay.
And sometimes the best strategy for a gene is to promote cooperation even between different species.
So a gene can be selfish by being cooperative? That seems like a paradox.
It is. It's all about the long game. Dawkins calls these win-win scenarios symbiotic relationships.
Okay.
Think of those little cleaner fish that pick parasites off bigger fish.
Right, yeah.
The cleaner fish get a meal,
Right.
and the bigger fish gets rid of harmful pests. Both benefit, and the genes that promote this cleaning behavior get passed on.
Right, okay, I get it. Everyone wins, including the genes. It's like those ants that farm aphids for their honeydew.
Perfect example.
Yeah.
The ants protect the aphids and get a sugary treat in return. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement driven by the ultimate goal of gene survival.
So cooperation isn't just some feel-good exception to the rule. It's a legitimate strategy for those selfish genes to thrive.
Absolutely. Now, are you ready for a mind-bending concept that goes beyond even genes?
Uh-oh. Okay, lay it on me.
Dawkins introduces the idea of memes.
Memes. You mean like those funny images and captions that go viral online?
It's a similar idea, but Dawkins uses the term more broadly.
Okay.
He argues that anything that can be copied and transmitted from one mind to another, ideas, beliefs, fashions, technologies, even catchy tunes, can be considered a meme.
So memes are like the genes of culture. They get passed on and evolve.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just as genes are replicators in the biological world,
Right.
memes are replicators in the cultural world.
Right.
They can be selected for their ability to capture our attention, stick in our memories, and spread easily from person to person.
So a catchy tune or a compelling story is more likely to become a successful meme, just like a beneficial gene is more likely to be passed on.
Precisely. And just as genes can sometimes clash,
Yeah.
means can also come into conflict with each other, or even with our genetic interests.
Hmm.
Think of religious beliefs.
Okay.
They can promote altruism and self-sacrifice, which might not always align with the best interests of our selfish genes.
Right. That's a fascinating thought. It's like our genes and our memes are in a constant tug of war shaping our behavior in different directions.
It's a dynamic interplay. Now let's dive back into the world of cooperation with a classic thought experiment. The prisoner's dilemma.
Okay, I've heard of this one. It's about two criminals who have to decide whether to cooperate or betray each other, right?
Exactly. Imagine you and I are the prisoners.
Okay.
We're being interrogated separately,
Right.
and we can't communicate.
Okay.
If we both stay silent, we get a light sentence.
Okay.
But if one of us rats out the other, the betrayer goes free while the silent one gets a heavy sentence. And if we both betray each other, we both get a moderate sentence.
It's a tough choice. You'd want to trust your partner in crime, but there's always that temptation to save yourself.
Exactly. And if we're both acting purely in our own self-interest,
Right.
the rational choice is to betray the other,
Yeah.
even though cooperation would lead to a better outcome for both of us.
So it seems like selfishness wins out again.
Not so fast. Things get more interesting when the game is played repeatedly.
Oh, okay.
Dawkins describes Robert Axelrod's computer tournament where different strategies for the iterated prisoner's dilemma went head-to-head.
So it's like a long-term relationship where you encounter the same dilemma again and again.
Exactly. And the winning strategy was surprisingly simple. Tit for tat.
Tit for tat. What's that all about?
You start by cooperating,
Okay.
and then you simply mirror your opponent's last move. If they cooperate, you cooperate.
Right.
If they defect, you defect.
So it's all about reciprocity. You're basically saying, I'll be nice to you if you're nice to me, but if you cross me, there will be consequences.
Exactly. Tit for tat embodies a kind of nice guy finishes first principle.
Okay.
It's cooperative, but it also retaliates against defection, preventing exploitation.
So in the long run, being nice but not a pushover is the best strategy. That's kind of reassuring.
It's a powerful idea.
Yeah.
That has implications far beyond the prisoner's dilemma. Think about those live and let live truces
Oh, yeah.
that sometimes emerged in trench warfare during World War I.
Yeah, I've read about those. The soldiers on opposing sides would sometimes refrain from attacking each other.
Exactly. It was a kind of unspoken tit-for-tat strategy. Unnecessary aggression was risky, and both sides benefited from a degree of restraint.
It's fascinating how this simple model from game theory can shed light on such complex human behavior.
It is. And it reminds us that even seemingly altruistic behavior can often be understood through the lens of the selfish gene.
Right.
Cooperation, in many cases, is just another strategy for genes to maximize their own survival.
It's all about playing the evolutionary game effectively. Okay, my mind is already reeling from all these ideas. Where do we go from here?
Well, prepare yourself for another mind-bending question. Why bodies? Why has life organized itself into these distinct individual organisms?
I've never thought about that before. We just take it for granted that life comes in these neat little packages.
Exactly. But Dawkins, using the concept of the extended phenotype, challenges this assumption. He argues that what we perceive as an individual might just be one convenient way for genes to package and propagate themselves.
Okay, now that is a deep thought.
It is. And it leads us to some fascinating insights about the very nature of life itself.
Yeah.
But we'll delve into that intriguing question in our next installment.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the selfish gene. Last time we left off with a real head-scratcher.
Yeah.
Why do bodies exist?
Oh, right.
It seems so basic, but now I'm questioning everything.
It is a fundamental question.
It is.
Dawkins, he makes you re-examine the things you normally take for granted.
He really does.
You might be thinking bodies seem pretty important for survival, right?
Of course. Why wouldn't they be?
But Dawkins, he uses this concept of the extended phenotype, and he suggests that genes can exert their influence beyond the physical boundaries of an organism.
Wait, so my genes are reaching out beyond my skin. That sounds kind of spooky.
It's not so much about spooky,
Right.
but it's more about recognizing that a gene's effects can extend beyond the individual it inhabits.
Okay.
Think about a beaver building a dam.
Right.
That dam is a product of the beaver's genes,
Okay.
just as much as its teeth or its tail.
So it's like their genes are shaping the environment to increase their chances of survival.
Exactly. And this brings us to one possible answer to the question, why bodies?
Okay.
Dawkins. He argues that bodies, with their bottlenecked life cycles, provide a unique advantage for cooperation among genes.
Bottlenecked. What does that mean in this context?
Imagine like a narrow passageway where everything has to squeeze through a single point.
Okay.
In sexual reproduction, that bottleneck is the moment when a sperm and egg fuse to create a new individual. Each offspring gets a unique combination of genes from its parents.
So it's like shuffling a deck of cards and dealing out a new hand with each generation.
That's a great analogy. Now contrast that with organisms that reproduce asexually,
Right.
like some plants that create clones of themselves.
Okay.
There's no real bottleneck.
Yeah.
Offspring inherit an entire set of genes,
Right.
virtually identical to the parent.
Okay, I see the difference. But why does that bottleneck matter so much for cooperation?
Well, imagine you're a gene in an organism that reproduces asexually.
Okay.
You're surrounded by copies of yourself, all vying for resources.
Right.
It might be in your best interest to promote your own replication, even if it harms the organism as a whole.
So it's a free-for-all where the most selfish genes win.
In a way, yes. But in a bottlenecked organism, things are different.
Okay.
Your fate is tied to the fate of all the other genes in that single cell that will become the offspring.
Right.
You're all in the same boat, sailing towards the future together.
Right. So cooperation becomes the best strategy for ensuring your own survival.
Exactly. That shared destiny encourages genes to work together for the common good, building a more cohesive and functional organism.
It's amazing how this seemingly simple idea of a bottleneck can have such profound implications for the evolution of cooperation.
It really highlights the power of the gene-centric view. Now, before we wrap up, let's circle back to something we touched on earlier.
Okay.
Human consciousness.
Yes. Dawkins argued that we humans have this unique ability for foresight, to think about the future and make decisions based on long-term consequences.
Precisely. And that ability, Dawkins suggests, gives us a degree of freedom from our purely genetic programming.
So we're not just puppets dancing to the tune of our selfish genes. We have free will.
Well, it's a complex question
Yeah.
that philosophers have been debating for centuries.
Of course.
But Dawkins' point is that our capacity for conscious thought
Okay.
allows us to override those short-term selfish impulses.
Okay.
That might have been beneficial in our evolutionary past.
So we can choose to cooperate even when it doesn't seem immediately advantageous to us.
We can. And that ability to act altruistically, to consider the well-being of others and the planet as a whole, might be one of our most defining characteristics as a species.
That's a hopeful thought. So what's the takeaway from all this? What does it mean to see the world through the lens of the selfish gene?
It's not about reducing everything to pure selfishness.
Right.
It's about understanding the underlying forces that have shaped life as we know it. It's about recognizing the power of those tiny replicators that have been driving evolution for billions of years.
Right.
And it's about appreciating the extraordinary journey that has led to the incredible diversity and complexity of life on Earth.
It's a humbling and inspiring perspective. I think I'll be looking at the world a little differently after this deep dive.
I suspect you will. And that's the power of engaging with ideas that challenge our assumptions and expand our understanding of the universe and our place within it.
Well said. And to all our listeners, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the fascinating world of science. Until next time.
Farewell, fellow deep divers.